heard something said on this and a former occasion about the allegiance to the South. I know no South, no North, no East, no West, to which I owe any allegiance. I owe allegiance to two sovereignty, and only two. One is the sovereignty of this Union, and the other is the sovereignty of the state of Kentucky. My allegiance is to this Union and to my states. But if gentlemen suppose that they can exact from me an acknowledgment of allegiance to any ideal or future contemplated confederacy of the South, I here declare that I owe no allegiance to it, nor will I, for one, come under any such allegiance if I can avoid it. Henry Clay, 1850.
The Mexican-American War resulted in a huge expanse of land for the United States. Southerners wanted these lands for the expansion of slavery. This sensitive issue, along with other sectional tensions, were thought to have been fixed by the Compromise of 1850, although the compromise served better to highlight the divisions between the pro-slavery South and the anti-slavery North. The Compromise of 1850 was a hard-fought compromise initially proposed by Kentucky Senator Henry Clay. He believed that to rest regional conflicts, a grand compromise addressing all the issues must be passed through Congress in order to preserve the Union. He addressed the issue of California by proposing to admit it as a free state. He solved the runaway slave problem by proposing the harsher fugitive slave law. He solved the slave state issues by negotiating the sale of New Mexico and led these states to public sovereignty. These compromises appeared as solutions to the problem, but in reality, it highlighted the issues for the nation to see. The issue of California was one of the biggest problems in the Union. The population of California was expanding rapidly. In addition, the white male workers refused to have slaves in order to protect their economic interests. This created problems for the U.S. government because it upset the balance of power in the Senate by giving more votes to the free states rather than the slave states. The Compromise of 1850 granted California statehood and it entered as a free state. This compromise did not solve the slavery issue, it just delayed the inevitable. The compromise tried to appeal to the South and the North by letting New Mexico and Utah adopt public sovereignty, which allowed those states to decide they needed slavery. The result was that neither the North nor the South was pleased. More importantly, nothing was solved and the debate was postponed. This once again served to highlight the divisions between the North and the South. It created tensions because it had the possibility of upsetting the balance of power in the Senate. To appease the South and make sure they agreed to the policies of the compromise, a stricter fugitive slave law was passed. This law meant that bounty hunters from the South could capture any black man in the North. The North felt this law was an outrage because it allowed Southerners to search white male property for slaves. It also meant black men, even freed black men, lived in perpetual fear, as they could be arrested at any moment if they didn't have the right papers. This led to increased tensions because it interfered with state sovereignty. It also impacted the lives of all black people.
What we have to understand is that this created an intense atmosphere in the North. Imagine at any moment of time a Southern man could show up at your house with a warrant that took no effort to get and could essentially upheave and raid your entire property in search of runaway slaves. What Congress thought was a solution was really amplifying the sectional tensions of the time. The Northern white men were enraged that their Fifth Amendment right was essentially being violated, and the Southerners were not pleased because many Northern governments refused to cooperate with the slave law. What this law did was take the political problems that each region was facing in Congress and bring it into the lives.
After California had been admitted to the Union, Congress became divided on many key issues. A pressing issue in the nation was the task of building the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1853, Stephen Douglas proposed the construction of the railroad in Congress. Being from Chicago, he wanted the nation to build a northern route going through his city of Chicago. To appease the South, he proposed that the Kansas-Nebraska territories use popular sovereignty to settle the issue of slavery. This effectively nullified the Missouri Compromise. After the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, slave sympathizers and abolitionists clashed over what Kansas should be. Soon the conflict turned to bloodshed. Pro-slavery Missourians, also known as border ruffians, entered Kansas to create a pro-slavery legislature there. In response, the Free Soilers created an anti-slavery legislature of their own, Angered, pro-slavery Missourians attacked the Free Soil town of Lawrence, Kansas, where 2 would be killed. Outraged, the Free Soilers, led by John Brown, attacked a pro-slavery farm settlement, killing 5. Conflict would continue for quite some time after these bloody events.
Securing Kansas for the purpose of extending slavery is crucial to our livelihoods. It is a Southern way of life, and we will do whatever needs to be done to ensure slavery succeeds in Kansas.
It is our duty as proper white men to make sure that slavery never takes root in Kansas. These lands are meant for white men to farm, to make a living from. You can't have a Negro taking our land. These pastures are meant to be used for profit by a white man, not as a plantation by Southerners. It wouldn't be long before the Bleeding Kansas conflict would spill over into Congress. In 1856, Senator Sumner of Massachusetts would deliver a speech that verbally attacked the Southern Democrats. A majority of his speech was aimed at Senator Andrew Butler from South Carolina, who was not present during Sumner's speech. Angered, Preston Brooks, Butler's nephew, physically beat Sumner with a cane, causing serious injuries. Senators applauded Brooks' actions, while the North, outraged at what happened, voted to censure Brooks from Congress. A part of the Compromise of 1850 was paying Texas to give up its claims to land in the West, such as New Mexico and Utah. This was an attempt to fix regional issues to keep peace. Texas, however, was willing to fight for these lands. To avoid a conflict, Congress agreed to assume the debts of Texas if it gave up these lands. Texas agreed, and the tensions were calmed temporarily. The Compromise of 1850 also passed a law that prohibited slave trade in D.C., but allowed slaves. The compromise failed to fix the underlying issues that were causing these tensions in the first place, and it tried to appease the South by allowing slaves. But eventually, without the slave trade, the slaves would cease to exist. The so-called solution was merely pushing the issue of slavery to be discussed at a later time. The Compromise of 1850 was meant to be an agreement that settled all the tensions between the North and the South in reference to the events of the time. It took all the issues and split it into individual bills in order to pass all of them and gain a majority of votes for each. The issue with this is that not many senators and representatives wanted all parts of the compromise. All of them had an issue with some factors, so they weren't completely happy. This was just a means of pushing off the problem to a later time. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln says that the slavery issue will not pass until crisis is reached. This shows the inability of this policy to create a lasting change. Adding California in as a free state caused an imbalance between the North and the South in the Senate and the House. This unequal influence precipitated conflict. The fugitive slave law, another part of the compromise, enraged the North. This is easily seen in the tension that is created. Overall, the Compromise of 1850 can be seen as a package of bills to appease as much of the populace as possible, but not finding a true unified solution, allowing for tension to fester.